We ready?
Yeah.
Hello, out there in Indian country. I hope you can hear me. This is John Spence. I'm Grove Mountain Sioux from Fort Belknap, Montana. And here helping me is Shailene. You want to wave her? You guys know Shailene Joseph, who's been, the technical person behind a lot of this good stuff here on these power hours. So, this is Scout right here, this little guy. She decided to join. This is my roommate's dog, one of her dogs. So I'm out here in Beaverton, Oregon, last few years after my wife passed. I decided to move out here close to my son and daughter who live out around here with their families. Only deal is this virus stuff, this quarantine's been keeping us apart. But, we're all learning to handle it in different ways. And so these power hours help. And I guess it's sponsored, is it still NICWA? Or the Noise Foundation? Okay. And anyway, again, I have a partner, Shailene, here, helping out with this technical stuff because, I'm too old for all this stuff. So on April 7th, we did a session on substance abuse in Indian country. We used this little diagram to kind of remind me of stuff, a little outline of things to cover. Again, just what I know, what I've seen happen around Indian country. Like I said, I'm from Fort Belknap. That's where I sobered up. I quit drinking there in 1982. Spent my first 5 years of sobriety at Fort Belknap. And out here, I spend a lot of time when we're not quarantined with the tribal folks with the 9 tribes in Oregon. And also Portland has a fairly large size Indian community. I think the census from 2010 said there were like 35,000 or something. I don't know. I know what it actually is, but it's pretty big. There's a lot of people here. A lot of people came here on relocation after World War II. A lot of like younger folk, your parents and grandparents, most of your grandparents, I guess, from World War II, moved out to the cities on relocation. And that's what happened with 2 of my older sisters and me, Avis and Marcia. Avis lives down in Scottsdale now, and Marcia's up in Seattle with her family. So I was in the 3rd grade when we left Fort Belknap and moved out to Seattle through that relocation program. And I need to tell a little bit of this background so you understand how I got here to talk about recovery and horse therapy with tribes. So my mother died when I was 3, and I never met my biological father. So my 2 sisters and I were raised by my grandmother, Molly Cochran Archambault. She's a Grove aunt, and our grandfather is Sam Archambault. He's Hunt Papa Lakota from Standing Rock. So, also when Standing Rock happened, of course, that was pretty personal. And, several of us from out in this area went there. Shailene went, I know, right here. And anyway, don't want to get carried away talking about Standing Rock. That gets too emotional. It was a great event, as you all know. Let me see, I'll show you my picture of my grandmother. So this is my grandmother, Molly Cochran Archambault, and we don't know when this picture was taken. I think she was a teenager in this one, and we have one more of her in regalia before she was married, I believe. So that was probably maybe around 1915 or something like that, when she was a teenager. So anyway, that's kind of like a good enough background, I guess, about me growing up and my sisters and I, and how we grew up. Okay, so this main thing about recovery, and then I'll get into horse therapy. So when we were kids, okay, this is in the 40s and 50s, on the reservation and that housing project in Seattle, and there were a lot of Indian families in that housing project, which I'm pretty sure would now be called a ghetto, but it's all right. It was, we were kind of all there together, and our families would come back and forth from Fort Belknap, so it was like wall-to-wall Indians all the time. Now, what I wanted to say about that time period is that during this time, like I say, the 40s and 50s, we were kids, it wasn't cool to be Indian. And also, like we were living in a poverty situation, although, maybe we didn't think we're really poor, except when we went to Seattle, one big difference is that we were on, we had to be on welfare. Aid to Dependent Children was called, because, we didn't have parents. And on the reservation, it wasn't as bad because, geez, everybody was poor, but at least you could make a living, right? Hunting, fishing, particularly hunting. And so, with commodities and hunting and stuff, we managed to get by all right. Now, when you move to the city, you don't have that. So, that was a little tougher. Anyway, again, going back to that time period, it was drinking, a lot of alcoholism among our people. I mean, we kind of like to not talk about that so much, about how big those statistics were and how they still are in a lot of Indian communities and with our families. But, it's still there. It's way better. So in my 37 years of sobriety, I've certainly seen a lot of improvement. I've seen a great deal of recovery in Indian country. And the first thing I think of when I talk about that or think about that is the powwows. Now, I remember real clear back in the late 60s, early 70s, at a powwow, you're going to see a whole bunch of drunks. I mean, you're going to see a lot of good things too, Our culture was coming back, cultural practices coming back a lot in the 60s, especially after Alcatraz in 1969. I don't know if Theta was out of Alcatraz too, but I know that Theta was around at that time in California, before she moved home, I guess. And anyway, I look back on Alcatraz 1969 as a huge turning point, that galvanized Indian activism. And then actually just prior to that, in the 60s, even in the late 50s, what history calls the fishing wars, or the fish-ins, around Puget Sound, particularly the Puyallup and the Squally tribe asserting their fishing rights, their treaty rights. And people were arrested, people were beat up. Anyway, I don't know if I'm really going off a tangent. I think you have to look at this historical perspective a little bit to understand, why we had such huge rates of alcoholism, drinking, and violence on reservations. But again, I've seen recovery really happening. So again, I sobered up in 82, sober for 37 years, and been pretty involved with a lot of things happening with recovery and treatment. And the other part is prevention. Now, this is why the Native Wellness Institute, all the stuff that Jolene and her team are doing, I think is so fantastic. Because nowadays, with the younger Indian folks or indigenous folks, there's been a huge renewal, a renaissance in pride and cultural practices, and going back to a lot of our old ways. And this, I'm just really pleased to see that. Like I said, I've lived long enough to see this incredible renewal. So let me just briefly go back to this chart that I talked about the first time back on April 7th. Right at the top, I have this heading here, Substance Abuse Recovery in Indian Country, and I have these words up here, genocide and generational oppression. So when Jolene goes out in Indian Country, and her staff, a lot of you know about this, her and her team, they go out a lot. They get requests from Indian communities, tribal communities, all over the place to help their healing. And again, healing, that word is so huge. I love it. I don't know when we started really using that word or the concept, but it's so powerful to me and well, to all of us. So it's the idea of healing from these things that happen to us. Outright genocide and generational oppression. And this is still happening to some extent, right? I mean, those people in Canada, that tribe is fighting against that, power lines and drilling and stuff, just like at Standing Rock, in 2016. And then here in Oregon, the LNG pipeline, liquefied natural gas pipeline, that it would terminate in Coos Bay on the coast, a place called Jordan Cove. So a lot of people here in Oregon, tribes, and a lot of environmental supporters have been fighting this, and hopefully, this is stopped at the state level. The state government here is opposing it, but unfortunately, one of the federal agencies ruled in a 2-to-1 hearing that it would be approved, the permit. Well, I think we have a good chance of stopping it. I don't want to get overly optimistic yet, but I think with everything that's happening here with the tribes and the state government, we'll have a good chance. Particularly the Klamath tribe. Kayla Farrell-Smith down there, Rowena Jackson, the tribal chairman, Don Gentry, they've been really powerful in opposing the LNG and Jordan Cove. So that is just one example of some real activism and things that are happening. And what I see, again, that this illustrates is the community coming together and are making connections. And all these things in this healing, in this circle, are healing processes. Right in the middle, I have culture. And again, Jolene and Shailene and their crew are doing a lot with that I see. And I mentioned the younger people, what's been happening. So Shailene here, right here, wave at the, so, Shailene and her group of young people, Jordan and Cocker and a lot of the other young folks that started this in 2017. So 2017, these guys are going around a lot too. And last I heard, you had like 50 different trips, over 50 trips to tribal communities to help with the healing. So this is really fantastic. It's just amazing to see, especially for an old guy like me to see this happening. So all these healing things, our resilience and renewal, we've always had resilience, right, in our survival. And now we're getting to renewal, bringing all this back. And all culture-based. And getting more of our spiritual practices back and ceremonies. And stories. I love this part. I said this last time. Like Gene Taggam on Right Away is one of the first presenters. And everybody that's come on here has told stories. So Theta knew breast a lot. And Lavana Louie. Anyway, and then also in here, these other elements. So music and movement and humor, our native foods, water, food and movement. I really liked how, Thosh and Chelsea have presented a couple times on here. How important that was. And I remember a couple years ago when Thosh and Chelsea were up here in Oregon doing a presentation. Thosh made this statement, something like, in our culture, in the old days, we were movement-based and inherently positive. Something like that, movement-based and inherently positive. And just think about that. To me, that's really powerful. So we're getting back to that, right? I mean, even back home in the 80s when I was working for my tribe, I worked there from 82 to 87. I began to see more and more people, for example, walking after work. We have a little airfield behind the hospital. I see people walking a lot, and we're having more running events. Like at the powwow at Fort Belknap for years now, there's always been the mosquito run. And then even the one up in Hayes in the mountains, we usually have a run there too. So, okay, movement then, really a huge thing. Okay, so in the culture and healing to counteract generational oppression. I mentioned last time some of the things that I've seen happening here, and I mentioned several organizations like NARA here in Portland. There's a great treatment and prevention program, and now it's a comprehensive health and wellness organization. NICWA, National Indian Child Welfare Association, that's based in Portland. Nanakoa back in the 90s and 80s was really good. National Native American Children of Alcoholics. And then GONA, the Gathering of Native Americans, starting in the 90s. So Theta and Jolene have done a lot of training with that to help Indian communities heal. It's a great curriculum, and it's been happening all over the place in Indian country. And then the Native Wellness Institute, 20 years ago now, right? So it's what Jolene and her team have been doing. I just, can't talk enough about how important that is, how powerful it is. And they've even been going to Australia and New Zealand, Hawaii. Have you gone to Canada? Yeah. Canada, wow. And then all over different tribes around the U.S. So Jillian has really started something fantastic. And then as a part of them, Shailene here and her younger folks started the Indigenous 20-something project. And again, I mentioned earlier, they've gone to over 50 locations now, helping out. And then White Bison, based out of Denver, Don Coyas and his crew. I think that started in 1988, something like that. And under White Bison, last few years, Wellbriety. And Wellbriety is I see it combining elements of like traditional AA, but Indianized, and with our indigenous cultural base. Like the Wellbriety meetings I've been here to at Portland start out with prayer ceremony. They use a talking stick. There'll be drummers, hand drum songs. So that's particularly the younger Indian folks around this area at Portland. That's all I know about here. I mean, with Wellbriety, I see a really good thing happening, but that's been attracting younger folks in recovery. So if we can keep going at these different ways of approaching this, I think we can even continue this. We don't need alcohol and drugs in our community, right? I mean, we've all seen, most of us have seen the hurtful side of that. And again, alcohol and drugs, what does that leave us with? Even if young folks are trying to be social drinkers, at some point you're not thinking clearly, and so that inhibits a lot of losing self-control and doing dangerous activities, self-destructive stuff. So the more that we get back to this cultural stuff and ceremonies, and start being more kind to each other, we can get away from alcohol and drugs. One of the things I just thought of about alcohol, a few years ago, NARA does a annual Spirit of Giving conference, it's called. It's been several years now. really well attended, like over 400 people every year. One of the speakers one year, a keynote speaker, and he's been here twice, I believe, is Dr. Eduardo Duran. And Dr. Duran, and I remember one of his keynotes talking about how alcohol, a lot of indigenous people look at alcohol as a spirit. In other words, it's a powerful force. And if you look at it, it's a powerful negative force. And this is why, geez, for years ago, I don't know when it started, but I know I first started going to sweats in 1972. And I remember being told, well, you don't go to a sweat until you've been sober at least 4 days. In other words, the alcohol spirit has left you. And so that powerful negative spirit can't be allowed into our ceremony. I really remember that. As it helped me a lot thinking about it. And so when I was trying to sober up, even before I finally quit drinking, I knew enough if I was going to a ceremony, I'd better not be drunk or have alcohol in my system. So that spirit, that negative spirit then, wasn't in our ceremonies. So I like that concept, that belief. So Dr. Duran, I don't know if you're out there, but I appreciate it. Thank you a lot. Okay, so today, as a part of this talk of recovery, I'd like to share with you some stuff that I've learned or been involved with called horse therapy or equine therapy. And I want to speak about it today, especially from a native perspective or indigenous perspective, okay? So equine therapy, or the value of horse therapy, has been recognized for, I don't know, quite a while now. But lately I see it's really taken off. It's not technically an evidence-based practice, that is a research-based practice. Although some people, if you stretch it, it is in some ways. Because we know it works. Anybody who's done this, been around this, we know it works. We know that if you're going to be around horses, and this is presented in a good way, in a gentle way, in a respectful way, and also including like in our indigenous practices, that this is a healing method. I've heard a lot of really good things over the years. I've been doing this since 2009 now. I got involved as a volunteer first. So the first couple of years, I pretty much, worked with a couple ranches here as a volunteer, therapeutic ranches. And then eventually we got some grants and wound up doing contract work since then. So I wanted to just kind of highlight what I've seen. Again, this is from an indigenous perspective. I can't give you a lot of numbers, like if this was a research project or something, but I'm just showing you what I've seen, and this is what I know, what I believe, okay? So I just want to start out telling you a little bit about my story, and I did, a bit here earlier, but then why choose horses? Okay, so it's been 11 years now. So I started out as a caseworker, 1964, can you believe that? And it's also ironic because when we lived in the housing project up in Seattle, it's a place called Lakewood, a real low-income housing project. My sisters and I used to hide from the caseworkers, the welfare workers, because we heard in those days that caseworkers would take you away. They'd steal you or take you away from your families. And this was true. We know that thousands of Indian kids were lost through involuntary placement in foster care, white foster homes or white adoptive homes. So in those days, especially the 40s and 50s, I remember, we didn't have a lot of political power, and we didn't know enough. Our families, a lot of times, I hate to say were illiterate, but we didn't have, like the formal white man's training, college educations. We didn't have a lot of native lawyers like we do now, native attorneys, to protect us. So again, it's kind of a sad memory, but I remember us running away from the caseworker. We'll be hiding when the caseworker would come to visit. So it was a little ironic that my first professional job was as a caseworker for Oregon Public Welfare Commission. So I got into that and found I really liked it. I mean, I identified a lot with the families. I only had a couple of Indian families when I worked there in the late 60s. And then eventually I started working for a poverty program in the late 60s and early 70s, and then with NARA, an Indian treatment program. I got more involved. We used to call that guerrilla social work. It was like we were occupying houses, we were taking over abandoned houses and putting clients in there, starting programs. AIM was getting started in Portland. We occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs, an abandoned Air Force base called Camp Adair down Corvallis. There was a lot going on in the country at that time. Fort Lawton in Seattle, 1970. Ramona Bennett, Bernie White Bear, Randy Lewis, I remember, with a bunch of other crazy activists. Indians took that over. And then AIM, of course, took over the BIA office in Washington, D.C. in 1972, and then occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973. So that's just part of it. The stories I've seen, and then some that I was involved with. Okay, why horses? Okay, years ago I used to rodeo. So, 1973 to 87 was. A couple years I missed. I was recovering from a bull who knocked me around pretty good at the Fort Hall All Indian Rodeo back in '75. Anyway, I rode my last bull in '87 at Chinook Old Timers Rodeo in Chinook, Montana. But anyway, so I got involved with horses, and actually I need to step back. I wasn't one of the kids on the reservation who, rode all the time or grew up with horses. Like I said, we were poor. I didn't have parents. So, I rode cousins' horses, when I could. But I really didn't, ride every day or just totally grew up with the horses. However, in high school, I worked 2 summers on a racetrack in Portland. That was my first time in Oregon. My stepfather called out of the blue, and I never spent any time with him. I never lived with him. But he calls out of the blue. It was the summer after my sophomore year in high school. He called and said, if you don't have a summer job, could you come down and help me with horses down here at Portland Meadows racetrack? So I didn't know the guy. I hardly knew my stepfather at all. He wasn't around much at all, ever hardly. So I thought, well, that might be interesting. I did. I went down there, spent 2 summers with him. So we were taking care of racehorses for those summers at Portland, Tillamook, Oregon, in Seattle. What was it? It used to be called Long Acres, the racetrack there. And then a couple small racetracks up in Vancouver, BC. So we were traveling around with horses. So I did learn a lot, even though I didn't get along with my stepfather at all. And but I learned a lot, and it's always something to be said for your experience, right? Okay, like I said, we didn't get along, but at least I learned a heck of a lot more about horses. So anyway, went off to college. Somehow I managed to get in college, and wound up in grad school, and got my master's in social work back in 1968. And then later, I was working with an Indian social work program at Portland State University. And with a master's degree, you're kind of not considered really a legitimate instructor at a university. So I managed to go off in a doctoral program and then go back home at Fort Belknap and work at our tribal college. Okay, so horses, going around again here. Easy for Indians to get off the track, we're We're circular talkers, right? Circular communicators. So how much time I got?
Half hour.
Half hour, great. Okay, so again, social work, that was what I got into, working with folks, individuals and groups and families. And this little background with horses I had, and of course from rodeo, a rodeo background, riding bareback broncs and bulls. Well, I'd been away from rodeo for a few years, and a friend of mine, Steve Vincent, he's Wintu Indian in North Dakota, or Northern California. Steve brought a couple of his horses to a powwow in Grand Ronde in about 2008, I'm pretty sure it was. And Steve said, well, you go ahead and ride one of the horses if you want. So I did, and God, it was good to be back in the saddle again. So this is really coincidental how my involvement started. That same fall of 2008, I started dreaming about horses. This isn't something I've talked about much. I don't know, it's a pretty private thing, the dreams, but of course Indian people, we've always believed a lot in the power of dreams, what we could learn from them, what it taught us about medicine and this and that. So I started having dreams about riding a beautiful sorrel horse, chestnut horse, back home on the hills. This is fall of 2008 again. Well, just again, coincidentally, it's amazing how all this stuff comes together. I happened to read an article in the Salem Statesman Journal, a paper in Salem. Oh, and I had been working at Chemawa Indian School and Grand Ronde at the Grand Ronde tribe. So that's why I was in Salem. This article in the paper talked about a Mustang rescue ranch just east of Salem. And it's called Mustangs and More, MOHR, and it stands for Mustangs Offering Hope and Renewal. So this was really interesting to me, but being a natural procrastinator, I put it off for a couple of weeks. So finally, I got up the courage and called the founder of the owner of the ranch and the founder of this program. She's actually a white lady named Debbie Dreisner. Debbie was right away said, "Oh, come on out and visit." So we did, and we really hit it off. And I liked what she was doing with the horses, which was she was rescuing abandoned and neglected Mustangs and other horses, but primarily Mustangs. So from my experience in rodeo, riding wild horses, particularly Mustangs, on the reservation, but right off the prairie there at Warm Springs, Oregon. For the bareback riding event, Warm Springs guys would just round these horses up and put them in the chutes, and we'd ride these wild horses. What I remember about that is, they were rough in the chutes, but if you bucked off or in an arena with these horses, they weren't going to run over you, and they weren't going to do like we stomp you. They would only run over a person if there's nowhere else to go. So I remember I had that back in my mind as I started working with these Mustangs at Debbie's place. And pretty soon, the Moxon Telegraph is powerful. A lady from Grand Ronde heard I was volunteering there and asked if she could bring a foster kid, a tribal foster kid, out to the ranch. So she did. It went really well. And I immediately, I'd seen this work with non-Indian kids. It just steamrolled. Grand Ronde started bringing kids to that ranch. The select tribes started bringing kids to that ranch. We started getting grants to work with kids. And that's what happened. It just took off. So since 2009, that's when I started. I've met a lot of great people doing this. I work with two main co-trainers primarily. A Cow Creek tribal member named Amber Jones, and a Warm Springs tribal member named Mona Smith Cochran. So these, especially one or two of those ladies, I'll work with their horses when we do horse therapy. And the last 2 summers I've been using my horse as well. So we've been bringing horses to the Native Wellness Institute camp, their Wellness Warrior Camp, for about 3 or 4 years now. And also a few years with the, Native Wellness does a training for tribal, particularly only tribal foster kids. And we've done that a few years now. Now the last thing I guess there's so much to talk about, but I want to recommend 2 really great Native trainers. Okay, here in Oregon, I'm going to work with Amber or Mona whenever I get a request or we hear about it. But otherwise, out in Indian country, I really want to recommend these 2 fellas. John Eagle Sr. at Standing Rock in North Dakota, and Thomas Smittle in Custer, South Dakota. Now there's all kinds of Indian folks or Native folks who have horses. I mean, a lot of us are horse nations. We had horses from the beginning. But again, we've gotten away so much from our culture, from our indigenous ways of doing things, poverty, alcoholism. We've lost a lot of land, and we lost this old connection. Over the years, we lost our old connection with horses, the cultural connection. This is coming back, and I see these 2 guys, especially John Eagle, these 2 guys, John Eagle and Thomas Smittle, of doing that now. I've been to 2 of the workshops at Summit, or at Standing Rock with John Eagle, and there's just no words for this. It's just amazing. It's a spiritual experience of learning to relate to horses in a different way. So he does that at Standing Rock. He's going to do that 2 or 3 times a year, but he also goes out and does workshops. This past December, he came out to Umatilla, the Umatilla tribe out in near Pendleton, the famous Pendleton Roundup. Well, Umatilla is right there. They had sent 8 of their tribal members to one of his trainings in September of 2019, and then in December 2019, he came out for a 2-day training, and it was fantastic. It was a good turnout from tribal members, and they loved it. I would love to see that happen on every reservation, that John Eagle or Thomas Smittle get invited out. Native trainers. But the other thing, even if you didn't use these particular fantastic folks or couldn't get them, every reservation, you've got that ability. You've got horses, you've got land. If you send 1 or 2 of your folks to a training where they get certified, I like John Eagle's best, of course, because it's called Becoming One with the Spirit of the Horse, and you get certification that way. There are 2 formal certifications that I have listed up here, EAP and PATH. EAP stands for Equine Assisted Psychotherapy. I know John has that certification, so he's got that too, the formal. And the 2 ladies I work with here, Amber Jones and Mona Smith, they both have EAP certification also. I myself kept putting it off because it's expensive and I'm just too lazy to go, I guess. But that's okay. I've been to enough of those workshops. I know how it works. And John's got it all in his training, so that's enough for me. PATH stands for Professional Association for Therapeutic Horsemanship. That is even more comprehensive than EAP, and the reason is EAP technically is only a ground program, but the workshops I saw where Indian kids were involved with EAP, heck, those kids wanted to ride. They wanted the whole horsemanship experience, which PATH gives. And nowadays, NARA in Portland, the treatment center, the adolescent treatment center, we are using a PATH certified instructor in Beaverton named Lisa Harmon. It's a PATH certified facility as well out in Beaverton. We've been using Lisa for quite a while now. First, we used to take our kids, the NARA kids, to a place in Oregon City. When that closed, Lisa Harmon moved to the place in Beaverton, and because we like her so much, and the kids are so welcome, we go there now. Last year, we even took a whole bunch of veterans, Native veterans, a bunch of us old fellas, went out to that facility, and it was really good. I think about a dozen veterans. And that's another good thing happening around the country is equine therapy is used a lot more now with veterans. It's really good for things like PTSD. So Horses for Healing, I totally believe in it. I've seen it. I'm involved with it. I want to keep doing it. I want to encourage you folks out in the Indian country to do it, especially again, those of you who are, have been horse nations in the past, to get it back. So that's what I want to say. Now, do we have some couple of minutes left? So how about if I have Jolene, I can't see that far, read off any questions you guys have. So my partner, Shailene here, is going to read them off, and I'll try to answer any questions, or if you want me to talk more about any of these particular things I've mentioned on horse therapy or recovery. Okay, so it looks like we have a few things on the screen. Okay, Shailene is checking you out. Let's see, to fill up space, empty audio space, I can say some more here, I guess. Here in Oregon, again, Amber Jones and Mona and I by now have worked with kids from all 9 tribes in Oregon. And we've also been invited out to 4 of the 9 tribes. We've done workshops at Grand Round, Warm Springs, Umatilla, and Cow Creek. Okay.
For EAP, do you have to be a licensed therapist?
Oh, EAP, there's 2 parts of it. One is, yes, a licensed therapist, but the other part is a horse wrangler. So to do a formal EAP training, you need both. This is what EAP is real strict on. So you have the wrangler who has taken EAP certification, and the horse and the licensed therapist. And so a team then. And again, they're real strict about doing this. The workshops I've seen of EAP, that's how it is. So for a lot of our tribes, if you can afford to send your people there, that's great. Like I say, Amber's got hers. Her tribe paid for that. Mona got her EAP certification when she was at Fort Belknap. And I forgot to mention, at Fort Belknap, we have 2 programs now, 2 horse programs. At the south end in Hayes, we have Toby Work, and he's EAP certified. At the north end, Steve Fox lives out at Hayes, but he's certified EAP, and Tesha Ann Hawley is certified EAP. So a little reservation like Fort Belknap, we have 3 people certified in EAP. So they've got the formal stuff, and they've got the native knowledge. This is, to me, is even more important. So if we can get more and more people certified through these, or especially John Eagles, I think you're going to be in great shape. Other questions? Let's see. I know it costs a lot to get this formal training, and you'll need to go off somewhere to do it. If you do the training with John Eagle, you just go to Standing Rock or have John come out there, if he's available.
Do you know anybody in Central Southern California?
Central Southern California. I don't know anybody. I'm sure there are some native trainers out there. But I'll tell you what, boy, if you could get out to Monty Roberts Ranch, where is he located? He's in California. Monty Roberts, he's a non-Indian. He's the guy who got so much of this going, the value of equine therapy. He wrote this book, The Man Who Listens to Horses, published I think in 1998. And Monty Roberts has gone all over the world now. He's even, the Queen of England invited him to train some of her horses. This guy, he's amazing. So try to get to, you can get on Monty's website, Monty Roberts, get on his website and find trainings that he's offered. Go there first. If you can't find a native trainer to come in, do that. Go to Monty Roberts, okay, in California. What else?
Um,
I know that more and more tribes around the country are doing this. Down in the Southwest, I forget, there's an Apache tribe and a Yaqui tribe, I think. They're doing it. South Dakota, North Dakota, programs are springing up all over the place. In South Dakota, you got Thomas Smittle, is at Custer, South Dakota. And I forgot to mention, Thomas is in a great movie that came out last year. Maybe you've seen The Mustang. Okay, it's called The Mustang. And Thomas is the Indian guy. He's the guy with braids in there. Got a prominent part. It's about a horse program in a prison. Shows how great this helps. The horse program helps the inmates there. Anything else there, Shailene?
Zeta just said Josh is working with horses in California.
Oh, hey, Josh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, all right. Okay, Josh Cocker?
Yep.
Oh, Josh came out to our place at Amber Jones' stable a couple times, and so I know he's gotten some tips from Amber, really good too. Yeah, Josh with the Indigenous 20-something project, great. Yeah, I know Josh has got a horse background. Kiowa, Oklahoma, right? All right, Josh, I'd love to see you if you're listening. Josh, I would love to see you get more involved and help out in this way. I know you're doing so many things, but you can do it. You know, that's the other thing. I want to emphasize that you guys can do this. And reservations with horses, you guys can do this. So Shailene's looking for more comments or questions.
Okay. Oh, she said in Santa Barbara where Josh is. They just did a GONA there.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Can you talk about what horse therapy is like?
Oh, what's horse therapy like? Okay, I remember what John Eagle said in one training one time. Everything about horses is therapeutic. Okay, just think about it. Everything about it. Let's say you're brand new, or you're afraid of horses. You've been bucked off or kicked or bitten or something by some rude horse, which was made that way by some human, not treating them correctly. The horse is bigger than you. It can stomp the heck out of you. So what happens if you're new or you're afraid of a horse? Okay, learning how to approach the horse with respect, learning how to talk to that horse, learning how to groom and brush and lead the horse, learning how to clean the horse's hoofs, picking up a horse's feet for the first time. These are powerful things that I've seen happening. It leads to incredible self-confidence. It teaches patience. It teaches responsibility. And again, the number one thing is respect. You're not going to be able to get along with that horse if you don't respect it. Again, it's bigger than you. It can hurt you. But they don't want to. Horses don't want to do that. Even wild horses. I remember another famous trainer named Frank Lyons, non-Indian guy. I went to one of his clinics years ago. And he said, horses only want peace. I like that one too. Horses only they only want peace. And another time doing a training, we had 90 kids at the Cow Creek tribe one time. Over 2 or 3 days, it really wore us out. We had 3 horses down there. There was a guy, Clint Bruised-Head. He brought some kids from Warm Springs. Clint is the world champion, a national Indian finals world champion. And Clint couldn't stand it. He had to jump in the arena with us the whole time. And when we were debriefing, we opened with a circle. We have a prayer. If we have elders there, we like to use an elder, prefer to use an elder or other elders. We find out where everybody is from, who they are, and what they want to achieve in that. What are their expectations? And a lot of people talk about their fears. That's great. But anyway, Clint Bruised-Head, we were debriefing with the kids, and he felt real good. He said, horses are my therapy. Okay, this is a world champion Indian cowboy. Says horses are my therapy. So, why are they therapeutic? Just being around them. I love it as a social worker. I'd say a former therapist, because at one time I was licensed as a alcohol and drug counselor. I let it go because I didn't want to do as much talking. With horse therapy, I don't have to do a whole lot of talking. The horse does the teaching. I and my partners, we're just guides. We are guides in helping a person relate to a horse. Number one, making connection. When you're able to make a connection with a horse, you feel better. So what's therapy all about? Healing. Make you feel better. You are healing your feelings. You're being around horses in a right way, in a good way. You're gonna feel better. And this works for kids, it works for veterans, works for all kinds of people. Is there any more questions? Or?
I'm just reiterating what you're saying.
I bet you there's a lot of amens out there, right? It's like, yeah, we got horse therapy works, and we got to do more of it. And man, I'm all for that. Total believer in that. Again, it's 11 years now I've been doing this, and I guess as long as tribes keep inviting me and my partners out, well, we'll go. We can. But it doesn't have to be us. Gosh, invite John Eagle or Thomas Smittle out there, and Fort Belknap. We got 2 programs now. It's fantastic. And again, one of the things I should have mentioned at the start, this isn't like training for a rodeo. This isn't, you got to be tough. Cowboys don't cry. Okay? You can't be afraid. Don't let the horse know you're afraid. But you know what? Horses will know you're afraid, and so what? You deal with that. I have a lot of kids I love it, in fact, when a kid says they're afraid or they don't know what to do, because 100% of the time, they're going to feel better. They're going to feel better in an hour and a half, 2 hours, or a half-day session. They're going to feel better. And you just, when you're working with a kid, just, don't push them, just encourage them. And that's the whole thing. This is encouraging a person around horses. I'll tell you a couple of people, adults, that were in a session and they swore they weren't going to ride a horse. They were not going to ride a horse. Caroline Cruz, I'm going to tell on you. Caroline Cruz out there at Warm Springs. So we got this grant at Mustangs and More, and Caroline was going to help us out with that. So, because she was putting some state money into it. So Caroline comes out there and right away, she didn't have a good experience back at Warm Springs with a horse. She wasn't going to do it. Well, step by step, Debbie Dreisner, the founder of the program and the owner of the ranch, just kind of encouraged Caroline and took her step by step. And before long, Caroline is on a horse. Sure enough, she's riding a horse. And then the other example I want to tell you about is this guy in my AA group. This AA group in Portland, in Beaverton rather, we've taken people out. This is a voluntary deal. We've taken out groups of people out to the ranch. And there's this one guy, he's a gang member from Compton, California. Big time gangster in the old days. And he goes, I'm not going to ride. I only want to touch a horse. I want to be a pet a horse. Well, we got him out there, and he's petting and grooming and leading a horse pretty soon. And not too long, we've got that guy on a horse. He's riding a horse. So you talk about therapy, in both cases they feel better, right? These two folks were pretty anxious. And I don't want to say afraid, but they were pretty anxious. Didn't want to get on a horse. But just with encouragement and approaching it the right way, it's not the rodeo way. This isn't, rodeo is a different thing. Rodeo is usually, your family teaching you how to do things and how to be tough and all. So this isn't rodeo. This is therapy. Not to say rodeo isn't a lot of fun. It does feel good, right? I mean, hell, I did it for a lot of years. But anyway, this is different.
About 5 minutes if you have any closing comments.
Okay, 5 minutes, closing comments. Well, the last thing, just to be sure, I want to thank Native Wellness Institute, Jolene and her team, all the fantastic things they're doing. Shailene for helping me out here. And last time I did this, April 7th, Laura John helped me out because I had no idea how to do this technology. Laura John, she's a Blackfeet Indian from Browning. She's the mayor's tribal liaison in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon. We have a tribal person assigned to work with Indian folks, Indian community and the tribes, and that's Laura. Let's see who else. I guess Niqua and the Noise Foundation. Thank them for sponsoring this. And closing words. Well, we've come a long way. Again, geez, I'm 78 years old. I've seen a lot of good things happening, Indian country. And we're going to keep going. Now we'll get through this virus, okay? We can do this stuff. Keep tuning in the Power Hour with Jolene's crew, and we'll all get this through this thing. Take care of yourselves, and just be good to each other, all right? Be kind and be good to each other. That's what this lady here taught my sisters and I. That's the basic thing. Oh, and generosity. In Gona, the Gona teaches that the main characteristic of Indian elders is generosity. And I've seen that. It's true. Okay? Well, that's it then. I guess we'll sign off.